Sarah, welcome to Easy Conversations. Thank you for joining me today and taking the time to chat. You're kind of giving me an overview of the heat wave you've been going through, and probably a part of the conversation. You've obviously just come out with your new book, I Eat the Stars. I was kind of looking through it, and I was wondering why the title. And what I realized going through the book was it's inspired through a poem. So I'm sure we'll get into that. But there's a lot to cover. But before we get into your book and the work you've been doing and the journey you've been on, I just wanted to give you an opportunity to share with us a little bit about yourself, who you are, and where you are in the current chapter of your life.
Thank you, Furkhan. That's a wonderful way to start a conversation. Yeah, I'm a writer and a former journalist, and I found myself in Paris predominantly to write this very difficult book. So I came here because it's a space. Paris has always been a place where
Mhm,
writers have come during difficult liminal times.
mhm,
If you think of the time between the two world wars, a very liminal time in history, and the existentialists came here to fathom a bunch of isms, as Simone de Beauvoir put it. There was fascism, communism, and
mhm,
existentialism all being considered at the same time. So there's certainly a legacy to that. But yeah, I guess to the deeper part of the question, I find myself in a liminal time as a
mhm,
journalist, as somebody who takes deep dives into difficult conversations and with a very large issue in front of us,
mhm,
which, as from reading my book, I define it as complex systems collapse. And it's
mhm,
something that we've gone through many times throughout history is what happens to complex or sophisticated or Goliath civilizations like the Roman Empire and
yes.
the Mayan Empire and so on. And we're at the sixth stage, which is the stage just before collapse tends to happen. We're at that
Mhm,
juncture, and a whole range of systems, in fact, all the systems have reached a peak in their
mhm,
growth trajectory, and they're about to come down the other side of the bell curve. So we're talking
mhm,
the energy available system. So we're thinking fossil fuels, population is about to reach a peak and then is about to decline down the other side quite
mhm,
dramatically. Food and water availability, those systems are at a threshold. Biodiversity issues, the climate, they've all
mhm,
hit this kind of peak at the same time. And this is how it always goes. Complex systems collapse because
mhm,
of their complexity. They become
yeah.
too complex to hold. And so I find myself investigating all of this, having written a book about it, talking to wonderful people like yourself around the world about the subject. And it's a hectic time to be alive.
Yes.
That's where I
Yeah.
land. Really.
And it's interesting because you touch on history, and it's easy to always read history because it can almost be in a short period of time when you're observing history and reading about it. But when you're actually in it, it's obviously a lot more difficult. And I'm wondering for yourself, what made this pursuit of writing the book so difficult for you? Was it just trying to take all the information and understand it and distill it into something that people can understand? Because one thing I appreciated about how you even present the book is you're not offering answers or solutions. You're yourself being curious and trying to understand what's going on and then sharing that journey with the reader.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. What we're talking about is something that no longer can be discussed in a linear way, which is how we tend to discuss things in books and on podcasts and in debates, right? We take a segment and we discuss it until we've resolved it, and then we moved on to the next thing. With the situation we're in, where all the complex systems are interrelating with each other to make up our civilization, a complex system of complex systems, there's no kind of thread that you can pull at, one thread where we can get to the nub of the issue. And so, the, to answer your question, the most difficult aspect of all of this is switching our mindset from the linear mindset, which has
Yeah.
characterized the post industrial way of
Mhm.
thinking, the materialist, colonialist, black versus white, fragmented way of thinking, and actually going into the complex systems or systems mindset, which is swirling and uncertain. And you have to discuss something over here and leave it unfinished and then see where it connects up over here. And you
Mm.
actually have to be in it, ensconced in it, moving and emerging with it to be able to comprehend it. And so to write a book about it, that the everyday busy person who is in the linear world, to be able to have them understand it it really required a different way of writing, and I had to
Mhm.
go into a different way of thinking. I'm a real left-brained material thinker from journalism and politics and those left brain kind of realms.
Yes.
And I had to really switch the way my brain works. Once I
Mhm.
did, it enabled me to think very differently. And for anyone who's wondering what I'm talking about here, right brain thinking, the kind of thinking that is able to comprehend complex systems and emergence and all of these kinds of terms, is the side of our brain that appreciates poetry and can create poetry and can actually understand nuances and jokes and things that are not really literal. And it's also the part of the brain that can exist in uncertainty and be able to say, I don't know. And isn't that a beautiful thing? It's
Mm.
the part of the brain that makes music and creates art. And it's also, I guess, a way of thinking that you could use to describe Indigenous wisdom.
Mm.
I'm Australian, you can probably hear from my twang, but the Indigenous people of Australia, and very much like the Indigenous peoples of Canada, they've got a way of thinking that is in congruence with nature, which is in itself a complex system and works in an emergent, interconnected way of looping cycles that all feed into each other and create a whole that's larger than its
Yes.
parts. And Indigenous wisdom teaches us to be in the emergence, not on top of it, not in that
Mm.
sort of very post-industrial colonialist way,
Mm.
which is to be atop nature, trying to conquer it and control it. So yeah, I hope that gives a bit of a picture, but that
It
definitely was the most challenging but rewarding part of being in this
yes.
space.
And to stay on that piece of the right brains and how we can perceive things, you also talk about spirituality in your book. And at times, this whole issue of systems collapsing can be frightening for people. It can create fear. How do you tie it in terms of spirituality for yourself? And why was it important to touch on that in this book?
Yeah, I think spiritual teachings generally flourish in times like this.
Mm.
Spiritual teachers come forward to provide assistance to humanity, to steer us through really wobbly, uncertain times. And in fact, some of the best religious traditions emerged, or spiritual traditions emerged in a very famous liminal time, which is the Axial Age. So
Mm.
Buddhism, Judaism, Christianity all emerged in this particular time. So I think that the two occur at the same time, and it comes forward to guide us. But I think a spiritual way of thinking is required as well, in terms of being able to think outside direct cause and effect and consequences. We need to pull back and actually see the larger picture of what's going on. And spiritual thinking is able to do that. And I guess there's also just the teachings. Spiritual teachings have, and philosophical teachings, I put them in
Mhm.
the same camp in many ways. They've always been about, as I say, guiding us in difficult times. And one of the big lessons, the fundamental lesson that a lot of the traditions have in common, is teaching us that to live well, we must first learn to die well.
Mm.
The Stoicists wrote, the Stoics, I should
Mhm.
say, wrote about this. And there's been countless spiritual teachers who've spoken about this. Montaigne, the sort of very early existentialist,
Mhm.
he wrote to live well, you must learn to die well. And he went to the
Mhm.
extent of digging his own grave.
Mm.
Idea was that if you could come up as close as you can to the inevitability of our own death, not only does it take away the sting, but it also creates this urgency to live
Mm.
fully now, to not treat life as a run up, as a dress rehearsal. I think it's a really strong characteristic of the neoliberal culture to live as though we save up money, we get second jobs, we put aside money for nest eggs and retirement plans so that, I don't know, we hit the age of 70 and go and play golf and die. That is the neoliberal promise. And it's all
Mhm.
about delaying life. So
Mhm.
that's what's meant by it. And I think that's actually one of the most useful spiritual teachings that I was able to draw on in the writing of this book. And in
Yeah.
fact, the writing of this book slammed me up against, I outlined 3 deaths. The first death, of course, is the death of ourselves. Like
Mhm.
we ultimately are scared that the AI is going to come and get us. Nuclear threat. Equally, I don't know, heat waves. Here in Paris,
Mm.
where I live, we've just experienced a massive heat wave that killed 1,400 people in Paris
Wow.
alone in a week from heat. There's that death. And there's the death of humanity, of us as a species, the grand
Mm.
project of humanity. And to me, That's a far more frightening death for
Mhm.
me, because I think that what a shame if we end it here through our own stupidity and limited thinking. And
Mm.
then the third death is the death of the system. The system, the neoliberal post industrial system that's roughly 270 years old, that has put us in this position. And the system that has been guided by the idea of infinite growth on a finite planet, which, you think about it for more than 5 seconds, was never, ever going to last. It doesn't stack
Mm.
up. It's a system that's faulty from the outset. It's extractive, it's not respectful, it's not sustainable in every sense of the word, and it's not human. And I
Mm.
think that's really important. When I was writing the book, this came up over and over again. What we're going through right now, including facing these deaths, is a reckoning, and it's forcing us to actually question what it is to be human. So,
Mm.
anyway, spirituality has helped me face all of those deaths, and it's enabled me to get the expansive mindset, if I can, because the sting has been removed, because I've faced up
Mhm.
to it, to be able to see that what we have in front of us is an opportunity only to restrict things to one death, and that is the death of the
Yes.
system.
Yeah.
If we let go of the system, if we let it die its natural cause, because it's
Mhm.
basically got too complex, it's outgrown its environment, if we let it die, we don't have to go down with it. And so that's really the
Mhm.
premise and the invitation of my book, is to let go of the system, to let it die, get out of its way. There's a wonderful phrase that another Canadian thinker uses, Vanessa Andriotti. She's an Indigenous thinker, and she says that she has the phrase, it's the name of her book, hospicing modernity. That's our
Mm.
role now. We hospice it to its death and allow the what comes next to flourish.
Mm.
Milton Friedman, the OG capitalist, ironically said that real change only happens with a crisis, and the what
Mhm.
comes next depends on the ideas that align around at the time. And again, another invitation in my book is, let's start getting those ideas lying around. We let the old system die. It's dying anyway. It's crashing around us. It
Mhm.
cannot hold. All of these wars and genocides and food bowl shortages and all of this it can't keep going. And so it's the growth mentality that is causing that destruction. And so, really, what we're facing is a mindset shift. And that's not as scary as what I think a lot of people think of when they hear the term complex systems collapse.
Mhm. Yeah. No, I appreciate all of that. And as you were sharing a lot, what was coming up for me was around the whole idea of death. And I feel as I've continued to grow and meditate on my own death, that gives me a lot more freedom. And I think part of the what you're talking about with the systems piece is if people are holding on so tight and they're like, oh, we have to use all the resources available to us, they're not thinking beyond death, right? Because it's the common conversation I have with people when they're close to retirement. And as you were sharing that, it's like now they have this existential question of what do I do now? Right. For
Yeah,
all
who
these
am I
years.
and what do I like doing?
Yes.
Because when you've been trapped in the system, you don't even have time to answer that question, because you're on the conveyor belt and it determines what you do next. Your degree, you enter your first job, you get married, you have kids, you do a summer holiday at and you're right,
Yes.
we get to a point at some point in our lives. As a
Hmm.
collective, we're arriving at this point at a similar juncture. Not everybody's arriving at the same point at the same time, but I think there is an overwhelming arrival point where we're all waking up to, oh my God, who are we? And what is this crazy thing about?
Hmm.
And now what are we going to do? A really wonderful question that the systems thinker Nora Bateson asks is, when she's met with the question, am I going to die? How bad is it going to get? When's it going to happen? She comes back with another question. She says, the really important question to be asking is, who do I want to be in this moment? And it's a fundamental reframing. And I think, if again, when people hear that question, I know I felt it when I first heard it, you suddenly go, oh, yeah. And you release and you relax into where we're at.
Yeah, and I think depending on your belief system, if you believe that once you die, that's it, then obviously that's going to create that sense of fear or holding on to things, right? But if, and this is where I wanted to tie that spiritual piece back in, that if you feel that this is just part of your journey, you're in this world for a limited time and things can continue, we just don't know how and why, then that changes your perspective a little bit, I suppose. So
I
get
think
it
it does
from
a
that.
lot. I think
Yeah.
it does a lot. And it switches our purpose. We are ultimately meaning seeking machines. We're not
Yes.
just creatures that go about and respond to things from instinct and everything. We actually require a broader sense of an understanding of why we're here. Again, the existentialists explored this. They identified that life is absurd. We know we're going to die. We're the only species apparently aware that we are going to die and it could happen any
Hmm.
moment now. So why the hell are we doing this? Oh, it's because, and XYZ, it's because ultimately we are
Hmm.
seeking meaning. And it's in the seeking of the meaning that the meaning of our life has importance and worth.
Yes.
And yeah, so that's something to always bear in mind. And so this very potent moment that we're in is
Hmm.
actually drilling us down into that. Because I
Hmm.
think for several generations, at least 70 years, but I would say a couple of 100 years, we've been progressively pulled away from those questions. So
Mm.
neoliberalism, I use this phrase a bit, took the moral umpires off the footy field of life, the football field of
Mm.
life. So when I say moral umpires, the spiritual guides, the philosophers, the right down to the Scouts movement, even the trade unions had a really
Mm.
important role in getting people to pause and think about what matters. Is it working for the man? Is it being on a treadmill? Or is it earning enough money so that you can have a viable life and bring up healthy children, et cetera, et
Mm.
cetera? And so neoliberalism got rid of those discussions. And so we are a generation or two or three who have lost that muscle. We're craving it. We are craving it. And
Mm.
that's why we've landed in the trouble that we've landed in, because we haven't paused to think about, does this matter?
Yes. And it's interesting you mentioned that at times like this, these transitory times are when a lot of the teachers and the wisdom seekers come out to help guide us. And I feel like a lot of the times people like that often take a backseat when things are so chaotic because they need to retreat and have space for themselves to really think and make sense of everything and just observe. And then when needed, they'll come forward. So I find that to be pretty fascinating.
Yeah, although, you know what I would add there,
Mm.
Furkhan, is that like I think that's actually a little bit of a contemporary interpretation or understanding of
Mm.
the spiritual teacher's role. In the past, there's that old adage or parable
Mm.
of the monk who meditated for years up in the mountain, cave in the mountain, and he was developing all these insights and going deeper and deeper into consciousness. It was wonderful. Nobody had done
Mm.
anything like this before. And then he just literally woke up one day and went, hang on, what's the point unless I go
Mm.
down into the village and share my wisdom?
Right.
So the monk comes down from the mountain. And in some ways, contemporary spiritualism has intersected with the wellness industry,
Mm.
literally an industry.
Yes.
And there's been this cherry picking of all the nice kind of vibes up in the cave, filling out and oh, hang on, that's all. I don't do politics. And I've done a number of conversations and presentations on this very topic. The
Mm.
spiritual has always been political. What do you
Yeah.
think Gandhi and Jesus were doing? They were deeply political. And so I actually think the role of the spiritualist or the person with insight, the philosophical thinker, I would even argue the neurodivergent, I think
Mm.
there's a piece there going on, is to go down into the mind and call it
Hmm.
out, come out and call out what's going on, to speak up, to provide guidance, to fill the vacuum that I'm going to use this word because it is what it is, that the
Hmm.
fascists are filling.
Mm. Mm.
A vacuum of meaning is opening up and the fascists are stepping in. And anyone out there with any kind of spiritual or philosophical inclination, now is your moment not to stand back and reflect too much. The reflecting happens in peace times.
Yes.
This is an emergency. We need the thinkers, the deep thinkers, and the people who can do embodied intelligence.
Mm.
So, yeah, and all kinds of spiritual traditions refer to this, even right down to, I love the parable of Kali, the Vedic goddess of female rage.
Mm.
She is brought down to the planet when humanity is becoming selfish and lazy and exploitative. And Kali comes down with her, I think it's 6 arms with swords, and she chops the heads off the indulged men on
Mm.
the battlefield who are destroying Mother Earth. And she gets them to wake up. There are times for rage. There
Mm.
are times for just engaged action, yeah, and not sitting
Yes.
back and reflecting. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And it's interesting. I was talking to another deep thinker, and he kind of used the analogy of the caterpillar transitioning to a butterfly, right? And that's what
Mhm.
he was describing as this current collapse of the system. Is it is painful. You want to hang on tight, but what's on the other side is going to be something beautiful. We need to open ourselves up to that. So that requires a little bit of hope, right? And probably more. And you open your book with the conversation of hope and your relationship with it. Are you able to share a little bit? Because hope in times like this can be tough for people to even grasp.
Yeah.
But I just found it very interesting in terms of how you described your relationship with hope and how
Mm.
people were responding to what you had to say about it.
Yeah, yeah. So this comes as a bit of a confrontational idea to a lot of people. I
Yeah.
basically declare in the first chapter of my book, and I caveat with, this is awkward, don't quite know how to say it, but I no longer have hope. And
Mm,
what I mean by that is, as a climate activist for many decades, there was this idea that we've got to give people hope. If they don't have hope, then they won't recycle and they won't switch out from they won't switch out to an electric car, et cetera, et cetera. And I just always had a bit of a problem with that because it seemed so infantile. Like we've got to mollycoddle people into thinking. And look, it wasn't working, right? There was all these climate stories saying this is the worst ever, unprecedented, yet another flood, yet another fire, yet another planetary boundaries being crossed. And then at the end of the article, invariably, there's a climate scientist or an expert who says, oh, but we can still make it if we all rally together. Now, they've been saying that for decades now. We've gone past the deadlines. Not a single nation on the planet is sticking to its Paris agreements. We've gone past 7 of the 9 planetary boundaries. We went through the 7th while I was writing this book. We've gone past that 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold that we were told we just can't surpass. And records are being broken in all kinds of directions. And deadlines were given, and we've gone past those deadlines. And so it's crazy making to be
mm,
told, oh, but there's still hope. Is there? There actually isn't, because if you think about what it is that we're meant to be hoping
mm,
for, it's the return. And I dug down, it took me months to go, what is it that we've been hoping for? And really, what it is that we can continue as we were, that we can go back to how things were before they started getting really wobbly.
mm,
That's not going to happen because now we're actually in a complex systems collapse, not just the collapse of the climate system. And the damage we've done to the climate is now feeding into the food system, the water system, the trade route system. It's having implications on the democratic system.
mhm,
All of these systems are now starting to buckle, and they're feeding back into the climate system now. So we've actually gone past the deadlines that we were warned about, and now the consequences are coming home. And that's all very heavy. But what I found, and I looked into the psychology of this, is that
mhm,
when you are told one thing, but the reality looks different, it actually creates this dissonance in the brain. And it causes huge amounts of collective anxiety in a people.
mhm,
And I was looking around going, everybody's going numb. Everybody, I call it like a buzzing anxiety, a background anxiety that I was detecting everywhere. People know things are bad. They don't want to talk about it. They want to bury their head in the sand and say, oh, but there's still hope. And
mm,
implicit in that is that somebody else is going to come along and fix the problem, right? We've gone past all of that. And it's time we actually wake up to this. And part of the reckoning that I write about in the book is that we've actually got to step up into our adulthood. That is
mm,
part of what we're being invited to do here.
mhm,
And I think, I don't know if your listeners feel the same and viewers feel the same way, but when I started writing about this, I wrote this as a serialization on Substack, thinking no mainstream publisher will publish
mm,
this book. So
mm,
I'll do it as a serialization. And there's a legacy of that. A lot of the most confrontating, but also most popular books throughout history have been written as a serialization. War and Peace, Dostoevsky, Virginia
mhm,
Woolf's books, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. They were all written as serializations in magazines or journals. So I did it on Substack, and I had a community of 65,000 subscribers who were joining in, giving me feedback in real time as I was going through my own journey, as you
yes,
said from the
yeah,
outset. And the response from them in that, after that first chapter, which took me almost 4 months to write because I was just really trying to craft it so it landed well, was relief. It was almost a
Mm,
spontaneous, all these people just wrote in straight away saying, oh my God, that's a relief to finally hear someone saying it as it is. And I looked around into the history of difficult times and leaders who decided not to promise hope and let
mm,
the people, I don't know, sink into a hopeful lack of action. You know what I mean?
mm,
And I found some wonderful theories. Václav Havel, who was the former president of Czechoslovakia and then a dissident, he wrote a book about this subject. And he said that true hope isn't the idea that things are going to turn out. True hope and is that things make sense no matter how they turn out.
mm,
And that's this idea of dealing with truth. And we're at a point where we need to deal with the truth by pretending that it's going to work out, that we can continue with the infinite growth on a finite planet model any longer is dangerous. And so I
mm,
set all of that out. And you probably read the bit where Liam Neeson chimed in. He reached out to me. He'd been reading along and he wanted to talk to me. And we started talking as I was writing that very chapter
yes.
when he and I were in contact, and we ended up actually meeting up in Australia. He came out to work on a film for a bit, but we were talking almost every day about this very subject. And I ran the chapter by him and said, "How does this land for?" He said,
Hmm.
"Yeah, this makes sense." And gave me the royal edict to publish the chapter. But I think this is the kind of conversation that we've been craving, because to
Mm,
keep the neoliberal system going, we've had to create a mythology around it. We've had to tell a story around it that progress means constant growth. And we believe that, right? And we believe the opposite of capitalism is, I don't know, communism, as though that's the only option. There's a whole range of myths that I had to open my eyes to in the writing of
mm,
this book. And I think the world is having a reckoning in and around that with what is happening with AI and the tech oligarchs and the
mhm.
Trump administration. It's all peak, as I say, on the verge of collapsing post industrial civilizational mythology.
Yes. No, and I appreciate all of that. And what's coming up for me as I hear you talk about that hope piece is it's not so much about hope, it's about more so taking agency and making change and stepping up. And a lot of people I've been talking to lately, the common message I hear is it's not so much about making drastic changes either. You can make impact and influence things in your little corner of the world. And
Yep.
that can also make a big difference because otherwise we lose all our agency if we feel like, oh, we're at the mercy of the system. And as you're talking about this reckoning, what I'm also seeing at times is people feel a bit isolated, right? So they're recognizing a lot of these patterns, a lot of these things that you're touching on, but maybe they don't have people around them that they can talk to
Yeah.
about this. And there's a lot of fear around that too, about saying the wrong thing and isolating yourself further. So even it sounds like in your case too, as you were navigating this piece around hope, you made sure you were talking to other people and seeing if it made sense, right? And
Yep.
how it was landing. So, what do you have to say to people that perhaps feel alone in this journey at times or isolated? Obviously, there's a lot of information out there that you can seek out, but what I find personally for me that's empowering too is being able to have conversations like this and learn
Yes.
and explore. So,
That's exactly
that's
right. The loneliness, I should say, fragmented, polarized world that we're in, it's not a coincidence.
mm,
This is what happens to complex civilizations just before they collapse. And it is actually the isolation of the citizens that actually contributes to the collapse. Because we, as humans, we're very vulnerable. We don't have claws, we don't run fast, we don't have fangs, we don't have a sting in our tail. All that we have is an ability to cooperate and communicate and create stories as a collective that can actually enlarge us and engage us, right? That is how we've risen to the top of the proverbial food chain. I hate that phrase.
mhm,
But so this has been, we are the descendants of ancestors who were really good at cooperating and communicating with each other. The rest of the humans died because
mhm,
while we've got a selfish urge, we've got that tendency, that survival instinct to look after ourselves and our immediates, we equally know, we're smart enough to know that we are very vulnerable on our own. And as a result, just to go back to what we were talking about before, we created these moral institutions, these spiritual leaders that reminded us to not get too selfish and to come back
Mm,
together as a collective.
mm,
Neoliberalism, like I said before, got rid of those institutions and encouraged the worst excesses of our individualism. And it's no coincidence that in the United States, which is peak individualism, is really collapsing hardest and fastest at the moment,
mhm,
because it really, the fabric of the society is atomized, and they've got absolutely no resilience muscle left.
mm,
It has been shredded. And it's also why I've just been, as I mentioned before, living through the worst ever heat wave that France has ever seen. And it is incredible. The city's not set up for it. Only 20% of homes have AC. The buildings are just like sweat boxes. However, the people are built for this because
mm,
they know how to go collective. They know, they protest constantly. They've got strong unions who got together and got straight onto the government and to the mayor's office and negotiated how workers are going to be able to operate. The
mhm,
police were able to negotiate with the mayor's office to open up the canals within a couple of hours so that people could cool off. The, the resilience is there because France has socialist sort of anchorings, and so what you're talking about there, the loneliness that many people feel, the lack of agency and power because they feel so isolated, yeah, that is actually exactly what landed us here. And so it
mm,
is actually the first port of call is to build
mm,
community again, is to actually get those hubs, those third spaces strong and resilient once more. Now, the wonderful news about that for anyone who's listening, who's just feeling like what we've got ahead of us is so gargantuan, is that once we actually move into that kind of communal, collective, hub building mindset, it comes to us so naturally
mhm,
because it is actually our human nature. We have evolved to do this. It actually goes against our nature to live in hermetically sealed houses in isolation, where we're on social media and we're not out in third spaces sharing a drink in the evening. This is something to bear in mind. The task ahead of us, and I say this towards the end of the book, what if this is easier than we even thought
yes,
possible, right? What if
yes,
we slip into this and it's like, oh my God, this feels right. It's effortless and it's all, and it's going back to that sort of emergent piece. Like, this is how we do this. It's not going to be a top down edict from, I don't know, the boss of the world who magically emerges at some point, or magically appears, I should say. It's
right,
going to happen through, as you say, small right actions happening everywhere all at once because we are in a joyful space,
mhm,
because this is our nature. So a lot of what I write about, it really is a homecoming. It's coming
mhm,
back to humanity. It's coming back to our
yes,
humanity.
yes,
So yeah, and you've picked up on something so important here. First step is get collective.
mhm,
So join a book club. If you're contemplating whether to sit inside and watch television or to go out into a park and read a book on the long summer nights, do the latter. Bake muffins for your cranky neighbor. Put together a dinner party in the car park at the bottom of your apartment block and get everybody to come along. Join a food co-op, whatever it
mhm,
is, and see and recognize that it's actually difficult at first because we have lost that ability to be social. We've actually
yes,
convinced ourselves that, oh no, we're introverted and people are all too much. We've got to stop that kind of a
yes,
conversation. It's yes, humanity it involves a lot of friction, right? But the
yes,
friction is the point. The edge is
absolutely,
the point. That is where the magic of life happens. So
yes.
push through that initial discomfort, and then you can enter the slipstream of ease. Yeah,
Absolutely. No, I agree with that 100%. I was actually talking to a friend yesterday too, and we were just talking about small goals, right? Whether it's around fitness or I was talking about the podcast journey I've been on too. And we all encounter those various friction points, and what determines growth and longevity is being able to push through that. And most people give up
absolutely.
at that time, right? And that's where they're unable to build that consistency. And I see that in the clinical work I do too. And along the same lines of reaching out, another story I'll share is a friend of mine and we started a men's group during the pandemic. And we felt as men, we were struggling during that time based on personal experiences we were having. And we realized that we weren't the only ones, and we created a community, and it felt odd at times. It felt bumpy. It didn't feel natural, but we stuck with it and we kept showing up every 2 weeks, and we built this community where we were supporting each other probably through hardest times for a lot of the men that were showing up. So there's different ways of doing it, right? And it doesn't have to be
Exactly.
complex, to your point. Now, the other side of it, it's in your book too, and you're touching on it, is the whole denial piece, right? Not being able to accept it. And then within that, another thing that was coming up for me as you were talking about the fragmentation is people will often say the system is malicious and it's designed to fragment us. But I'm not hearing that from you. What you're saying is it's just a byproduct of the system. And we don't need to necessarily look at it as this evil force that we're
Mm.
facing. But again, it's coming back to that agency piece. So I just wanted to put that out there too.
No, that's right. I think part of the reason that I go into such detail in explaining how complex systems work, and I
Hmm.
bring in game theory and these ideas in and around the meta crisis and so on, is to give people an understanding of what is actually going on. And once we do that, we realize there's no one to blame, and yet we're all to blame,
Yes.
and we're all in this. And so we can't point the finger, and that actually shifts your thinking because it goes, I can't keep pushing it out there. All that's left is right here. And part of also having an understanding that it's a systemic thing is we then have compassion for ourselves and for those around us. And
Yes.
we really do need to, it's not about going easy on us
Mhm.
because this is not the time to go easy. It's about having a tenderness and an awareness that I say this a few times in the book. You know what? We're just not as good as we thought we were. I think we'd really built up this idea of human supremacy, that we could
Mhm.
overlord over nature, right? We could conquer. And we worked out, in fact, no, that's not true. And nature always bats last. And that the intelligence that holds all of life together is way more superior than us.
Mhm.
So it's both humility that we have to go through, but also, a large amount of compassion.
Mhm. Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up humility because that was another thing I wanted to talk to you about was how do you create humility in your life and where do you feel we can all focus that energy? I think for me, it's just reminding myself, one, I don't have all the answers. And then the second piece I always remind myself is there's so many forces outside of my
Mm-hmm.
control. And I'm just a little, it's not like I'm small. I have a big impact, but at the same time, I need to just focus on that and not lose sight of everything, what I can
Yeah,
influence. Right. So I think it's
yeah,
important to have that reminder around humility and remain grateful too around everything you're
yeah.
experiencing.
Yeah, it's being able to say, I don't know. So, in a
Mm,
conversation, we're so used to, particularly in the neoliberal Western world, we always have to have a hot take. We always have to, and we argue to be right. My meditation teacher, who unfortunately took his own life while I was writing this book, so it was also, in some ways, was brought into my journey. He used to say to me, Sarah, do you want to be right or do you want love?
mm,
And that would really take me down to a humble place. So some of those really simple, I think, aphorisms or koans are a really good way to cut through to that humility. Being in nature does it as well. Just, I have to write this book to do anything I do. I have to be in nature. I have to go running and
mhm.
dancing in nature. And it sounds woo woo. It's not really. It's just, I've worked out a long time ago that's what works.
Mhm.
And just observing the patterns. Oh my
Yes.
God, there's something way bigger than me going on here. It knows what it's doing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
to be caught out in a storm or to be just stopped in your tracks by a sunset or to sit and stare at a leaf and go, wow, look at those fractals. And when the fractals in the leaf or the fern or the flower hit the retina, which is also a fractal patterning, and there's this congruence that happens in our
Yes.
brains, we go, oh my God, we're part of this. Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's how I do it.
Yes. And someone shared this with me, so I'm not going to take credit for it, but it makes so much sense. Is she said the one of the beauties of nature is everything is in complete surrender, right?
Yeah.
And when you're
Yeah.
there, to me, yeah, and reminding myself of that is that as humans, we create so much resistance, and that's where a lot of that, self-induced, there's stress, anxiety, all of that, but being able to find complete surrender, and I think that's what nature
Mm-hmm.
reminds us. So yeah, I agree with you. That's where I find my sense of connection and being grounded, is being out there and being able to sometimes remove myself from the digital world. It's just
Yeah.
a good reminder
Well, the
for
great thing
sure.
about nature, so often you can't get Wi-Fi. So it actually forces one of the wonderful things about hiking is I often also to preserve your phone battery so you can use it as a navigation tool, a compass on your phone, is you've got to turn it onto airplane mode. And it's wonderful. You have a good
Yes.
5 hours without any digital connection. It forces you into that space.
Yes, absolutely. So just more of that, hopefully, for people. But
Yeah.
what are some last key takeaways that you would like to leave us with? Because we've talked about quite a bit, but if you had to give us anything to keep focusing on and moving towards, what are some of those things that we can all
Mm.
do as part of our work in this whole universal
Yeah.
system, right?
Next universe. Yeah, next universe. Why don't I just rattle off a couple of things, techniques and strategies, or not strategies so much as, but it's things
Hmm.
you can do that will actually prepare you for what's ahead and also help you regulate your nervous system, which is really important in all of this. I have a chapter on dancing. I looked at the history of dancing and how it's emerged during times like this, during the Black Plague, just after the Vietnam War. It was a week after the Vietnam War ended, disco started. It lasted 4 years only. During the Black Plague, monks walked through Europe, and these villages had 10% of their inhabitants left. And they were doing this sort of almost obsessed dancing. And dance is a way to actually regulate our nervous systems when we're in a threatening situation and we can't flee from it and we can't fight. Now, fleeing and fighting is our general stress response, right? Both involve movement, right? Both involve within the survival technique is a
Yes.
shaking off of the energy. The kind of threat we have, we're stuck, and so we'd find ways to get rid of that nervous energy, and as a collective as well. So dance is one thing. I took up intuitive dancing. They have quite a few of these workshops around the world. I highly recommend going and
Hmm.
trying one out. And I've noticed that they're popping up everywhere. And of course
Mm.
they are at this point in history. The other thing to do is not prep. A lot of people ask me, should I be prepping? It doesn't work. And I go into the statistics and the details as to why it doesn't work. So all those tech bros that are building bunkers, they're not going to be protecting themselves from anything. It cannot last. They're going to have to pay what? Bodyguards, security agents. What are they going to pay them with when the
Mm.
financial system goes down, which I presume is what will happen if it requires them to go behind walls in a bunker, right?
Right.
So instead, again, go collective. That is the only way we're going to be able to do this. Get together. The stronger sort of bonds within a community, the more likely you will be able to muddle your way through whatever comes our
Hmm.
way. And the other final thing I'll just say as a sort of a takeaway is probably the most pragmatic thing you can do is simplify your life now.
Mm.
So going forward, there are going to be supply chain interruptions. There's going to be electricity and internet disruptions. And the best idea is to become as less reliant on those systems as you can. So get a bike because it's possible fuel will run out at some point. Even if it's only temporary, it'll be a major disruption. There'll be dominoing effects. Get a bike. Start to get analog with your life in terms of using a compass, using a map to get around the place, writing down addresses or important addresses and things like that, or anything else that you currently have on your phone, and you will be stuffed if the internet goes down for an extended
Mm.
period of time. So
Mm.
do that kind of thing. Just consume less is really important. Rely
Hmm.
less on things. And if
Hmm.
you've got children, bring them up in a way where it's about experiences. Get your kids into the Scouts movement or something similar where they're actually learning survival skills, dare I say it. It always sounds bizarre when I bring that up, but here in Europe last year, the European Commission advised all leaders to tell their citizens to
Hmm.
prepare a survival kit in the event of a major calamity, such as a Third World War or a heat wave or a flood or something like that. And this kit is purely analog stuff. So
Yes.
simplify your life now because life is going to become more simplified. And the more that you can start to prepare for things in that way, a phrase that's used is pro-social prepping. So
Mm.
you're preparing yourself in such a way where it's very communal. So you share this kind of information with your
Yes.
neighbors and your friends and your family, and you build a resilience around your
Hmm.
community. So
Yes.
yeah, I would say those three things are probably a good starting point.
Yes. So all of it revolves around taking more agency. So thank you for that, Sarah. Really appreciate your time today and this conversation. And I'll recommend to the readers, check out Sarah's book, I Eat the Stars, and I'll put all of that in the show notes. But really appreciate your time today.
Oh, I've really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.